The following is a special presentation of NBC 41.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Welcome to NBC 41's Kansas City Crossroads Volume 2. We've put together 2 hours of stories about the people, places, and events that have helped shape the history of our city. From the heyday of Kansas City's passenger railroad service to ice delivery to your door. From the simple brushes of an amazing artist to all-night parties at the edge of the United States, just off State Line Road in 1843. So sit back and enjoy NBC 41's Kansas City Crossroads, Volume 2.
Woven through time, a tapestry of stories defines who we are and gives us a sense of place. From NBC 41, this is Kansas City Crossroads.
On November 1st, 1921, 200,000 people gathered here to dedicate this site to the memory of those who died in World War I. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. That November day in 1921 also marked the beginning of a remarkable chapter in our city's history, when thousands of people united in one effort to build a national monument, the Liberty Memorial.
They raised $2.5 million in less than 2 weeks. It was a wonderful thing to think about, that there was that kind of patriotism in the community where 83,000 people would donate money to create the memorial. When construction started on the Liberty Memorial in 1923, a lot of the power was actually supplied by mules and horses. A lot of labor, a lot of people worked on the memorial over the 2.5 years while it was being constructed. The original dedication of the memorial itself, when it was completed, was November 11th, Armistice Day of 1926. Again, probably 200,000 people were here. You look at the photographs of that dedication, and it's just everywhere. It's just a sea of people.
Those people came to marvel at this limestone-covered tower that rises 217 feet above ground. And atop this grand monument to those who fought and died in World War I are 4 guardian spirits who symbolize courage, honor, patriotism, and sacrifice.
To me, it's like hallowed ground. It's more or less hallowed ground because this is a monument to a lot of nice guys that are gone. You know, some were killed in the war, like people like my dad who lived through the war, although they were wounded and gassed and then died later.
At the end of the long mall, 2 sphinxes grace the entrance to the courtyard.
The one that faces east is called Memory, and it's to remember the men and women who served in the war. You look at them, you'll see that it has its eyes covered, and that's just against the horrors of the battlefield, so we don't remember those. The one on the other side is called Future, and it's really for Kansas City. It's because Kansas City for many years was the place where people came to go off to their future in the West, and it has its eyes covered symbolically against the unseen future.
Though its future is at a critical crossroads, the monument stands as a tribute to our past.
The names in bronze on the wall in Memory Hall at the Liberty Memorial represent the 441 Kansas Cityans who died during the war. And so those names are probably the most important part of the memorial, is that those are the people it was really built for, and those are the people that it still stands for.
Rusting iron, tattered bits of fabric, and scraps of plywood. These remains are a forgotten part of aviation history, resting here in a field near Kansas City, Kansas. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, the story of World War II gliders and the amazing men who flew them on a wing and a prayer.
Between Civil War horses and modern-day helicopters, there were gliders.
It was real interesting flying gliders, especially this bird here. This was designed for a combat situation, designed to carry either infantrymen in here or a howitzer or a Jeep trailer full of ammunition or a Jeep. And this nose section here is hinged at the top. If you had a Jeep in here, it would be hooked up to cable back there. And when you landed, you could disconnect the nose and drive the Jeep out.
Weighing 7,000 pounds when fully loaded, the gliders were pulled into the air by tow planes, reaching speeds up to 150 miles per hour.
They had a little formula you figure out, but the people that used that formula all got killed. You had to just get so you look out and you could see. You see a field out here, you just had to know by experience that you could make it. And just had to, it's what's called flying by the seat of your pants.
The lucky pilots walked away from those perilous landings. Many did not.
I saw a number of these crashed and all beat up in Normandy. Well, I think they averaged 4 casualties per landing. The trees, poles, the wires and all that sort of thing were what actually caused the casualties.
The risky strategy for delivering troops and supplies was called vertical envelopment.
An example of that was in the invasion of Normandy. Now, at Utah Beach, we dropped paratroopers and gliders back behind the beach, and we started attacking the Germans, disrupting communications, blowing up bridges, doing all kinds of things, and completely disorganized their resistance at Utah Beach. So it was obvious that the vertical envelopment back behind Utah Beach was extremely effective.
Though their effectiveness is undisputed, glider pilots are sometimes called the forgotten heroes of World War II. To make sure their heroic efforts are not forgotten, former glider pilots and aviation enthusiasts are preserving history at Whiteman Air Force Base in Knob Noster, Missouri. Affectionately called the Glider Gang, they will restore a CG-4A glider and establish a museum to honor those men who risked everything so they could fly. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. There was a time shortly after World War II when every 7th woman in the United States wore a dress made in Kansas City. One of the coveted labels belonged to a well-dressed and gracious lady who revolutionized the garment industry. Her name was Nell Donnelly Reed, and her Nelly Don label was known around the world.
Nell Donnelly believed a woman should always look her best. The common, shapeless house dresses didn't suit her sense of style, so she made her own.
She made a lot of clothes, and when she would go out to do her washing, the neighbors would see her clothes that she was wearing, and they admired them and wanted to know if they could have something as attractive as she was wearing.
In 1916, after much encouragement from friends and family, she took samples of her dresses to a Kansas City retailer who liked what he saw and ordered 18 dozen.
She hired 2 neighbors to help her sew, and they had them ready in 2 weeks and took 216 dresses back to George Peck and Company, where they were sold out by noon. And from that grew one of the largest apparel companies in the world. She employed eventually between 1,000 and 1,300 people in the Kansas City area.
By 1931, what had begun in Nell's attic had grown to a $3.5 million business. Nelly Don's dresses were reasonably priced and, most of all, attractive.
They were feminine, they were pretty, they had ruffles, they weren't ugly or plain anymore, and she had unique styles. As I said, she called them bungalow aprons rather than a house dress. They were pretty enough to wear anywhere, not just out to do the washing. She could wear them to the store or whatever, take the streetcar anywhere, and you felt halfway dressed up.
While making her mark on the women's ready-to-wear industry, she also pioneered innovations in the workplace.
In many of the garment companies, a lady probably made collars all day long, or sleeves, or just one particular item. But in Nelly Don's factory, a group would put a whole outfit together so that they saw what the finished product looked like, and many of the workers always knew where the dresses were going, who had bought them, and where they were being shipped overseas or here in the United States. She was always kind, she was always considerate, and her employees came first. She felt that if their working conditions were good, they would put out a good product and would be productive.
Nell Donnelly Reed's factory was one of 86 factories like this one that draped the Kansas City garment district in its heyday, when 8,000 people worked here. She retired in 1956 before overseas competition brought the industry to a crossroads. By the mid-1970s, her garment factory in Kansas City had closed its doors, leaving Nelly Don dresses stitched in time. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Somewhere between the oxen-pulled Conestoga wagon and modern air travel lies a ribbon of steel in Kansas City history. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Back in 1887, a gentleman named Arthur Stillwell gave us our own homegrown railroad, the Kansas City Southern Railway. It began as a mover of freight, but by the time it introduced the Southern Bell in 1940, it had mastered the art of moving people.
You must remember that we took young people off the farms and off the streets, put them in uniform, and maybe perhaps for the first time in their lives, they traveled by train. Many had never traveled by train before. This was the prelude, so to speak, to the big surge in railroad travel after World War II.
Passengers added additional revenues to the railroads, but it was always freight service that carried the financial load.
Here comes a double-header freight train, headed for the sunny south.
Back in those days, Kansas City was, and in some respects still is, the #2 rail center in the United States. But there were 12 railroads serving Kansas City at that time, and each of which operated passenger trains in and out of Kansas City.
All aboard!
Families especially enjoyed the amenities offered on a passenger train.
It gave children a chance to roam. They don't have that on an airplane today. There was a dining car available. You could eat a meal for a reasonable price, and that was something that Kansas City Southern always boasted about. It didn't cost you an arm and a leg to eat on the train and to sit there and watch the countryside go by.
Right after the Southern Bell came on, passenger service exploded. This went on for some time, and then all of a sudden we came to the crossroads. People then decided that they could start flying. Airfare became much cheaper, the volume started to pick up, and people found out that their time was much more valuable, and consequently they'd be willing to pay the extra money in order to ride on the plane rather than on the train.
Then as the highway system developed and automobiles became more luxurious, and you could come and go where you wanted, when you wanted, that was a competitive factor the railroads couldn't contend with.
On November 3rd, 1969, the Southern Bell made its final run into Union Station, the end of the line and the end of an era. But Kansas City Southern survived the death of passenger service. The little railroad that could thrives today with an increasingly successful freight business. And a restored Southern Bell still courts the rails. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Dear Mom, I'm going to Handicraft Lodge. The river is up, so we can't go swimming. I have some poison ivy. Somebody stole most of my candy, so don't send me any more. Please send some shorts and socks. Love, Robert.
Some traditions in scouting never change. Though that postcard was written in 1933, it could have been written this summer by any of the 6,000 scouts attending camp in Osceola, Missouri. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. For a young man growing up in Kansas City in the 1930s, Scout Camp was a 2-week adventure filled with swimming, horseback riding, and lessons around the campfire. That rich tradition of Scout Camp was started by a lawyer named H. Roe Bartle, whose heart matched the size of his 6'6" frame.
Mr. Bartle was very dynamic scout executive. It's hard to describe him. He was brilliant. He had boundless energy, fabulous voice, deep bass.
I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country and to obey.
I have heard him when we had our Boy Scout roundups in the arena of the Municipal Auditorium with the floor completely filled with scouts, stop the grand entry and lead in the Pledge of Allegiance without the PA system.
And with the scout sign over our hearts, reverently we pray together. Really built scouting in Kansas City to what it is. And the camp here and the tribe of Mickosay, which he started, is what keeps the young men coming back year after year after year.
In the early years, scouts were awakened by a bugler playing reveille into a megaphone. After flag raising, scouts enjoyed a variety of activities, but swimming was a particular favorite.
The whistle blows and the swim's on.
With scouts always keeping a close eye on their buddies.
Each scout holds the hand of his buddy aloft as the lifeguard checks to make sure all is well.
And of course, they worked on merit badges.
There is no more valuable method of education than learning by doing.
The merit badges were pretty much the same that were offered here at camp. A lot of the older ones no longer exist, like blacksmithing and masonry and poultry keeping, such as that. But they had bird hikes early in the morning if they were taking bird study merit badge, and went out looking for snakes on reptile study, just like they do now.
Today, interest in scouting is again on the upswing.
The Boy Scouts have held very strongly to belief in God, keeping yourself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight, and have continued to push those ideals and stand by them. And I think that's one reason why a lot of parents are encouraging their boys to be scouts. And let's face it, they have a lot of fun too.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
My grandfather was raised on a farm in northern Missouri, and I think he had always maintained a love for the land, and so it was important for him to have a place to get away from the city and kind of get back to his roots. My favorite spot is the Rock and Waterfall Garden. Not only because I think it's a particularly beautiful setting, but as I used to come out here with my grandfather at a very young age, I used to build forts along the creek where that garden now is situated. You know, it's just a paradise. Our primary purpose was to fill a need
that we saw for Kansas City. I think at the same time, if my grandfather were here today, that he would be very proud of what we've accomplished here. I think this is a very good use for the land that he originally provided for us.
Here at the world's longest water bar in Excelsior Springs, people drank water that many believed had healing powers. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. The elixir bubbled up all over town. At one time, more than 46 springs and wells were located within 1 mile of this place that visitors reverently called the Hall of Waters.
Excelsior Springs was founded in 1880, and it was founded for the simple reason of the water. They tested it, and it was called iron manganese. It was an incredible water, and the reason it could heal so many different things is that it was the right combination of iron that your system needed, but manganese helps your system assimilate iron much easier. So that's the reason it could work on so many different ailments.
As word spread about the amazing water, people came by the thousands to drink from the springs.
Many businessmen from Kansas City saw the potential here, and by 1888 they had plans for a first-class hotel, which is what the Elms turned out to be, and they planned a neighborhood around it. Well, they were afraid they were going to run out of water, so they started to dig other springs. And as they started to do that, they kept finding different kinds of waters, and they were surprised, until finally they had found 5 kinds of water. Now, in 1935, when they decided to create the mineral water system and clean up the town, what they did was they made it illegal to take a bath without a prescription. So you had to come here and go to the doctor and have your condition checked out. And according to whatever the doctor found, he gave you a prescription that said, first of all, how many baths you would take and in what order and how long they would last, how much water you would drink. You would get a prescription for the kinds of water that you would have, the different times of day you would drink those water and how much of them. So they came back and they built this incredible facility that included 2 full bathhouses, the world's longest water bar, 3 swimming pools, a bottling plant, and the sales offices and support and staff that they needed. It was built to be the best health facility in the United States, and they called it the Haven of Health.
During the 1930s and 40s, the town boasted more than 500,000 visitors each year. Then in the 1960s, doctors were prohibited from advertising their services.
When they were no longer able to advertise, and there was no other organized group in Excelsior Springs, no other industry in Excelsior Springs to pick up that slack or to continue to advertise the town. So everything just kind of went to sleep.
After a 30-year rest, Excelsior Springs is enjoying a renaissance, with people revisiting the restored hotels and bathhouses, and of course, drinking the water. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. The first wheat seeds of Kansas traveled all the way from Russia in burlap sacks carried by Mennonite farmers. After perfecting the art of growing hard red winter wheat in their homeland, the Mennonites brought their hardy turkey red seed to Kansas.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. In 1870, the railroad companies wanted to build communities along their tracks. And so they traveled far and wide, spreading the word about this fertile land in the Midwest. Russian Mennonites listened, and soon they were arriving by the dozens, their hearts full of hope, to this land filled with promise.
Well, of course, wheat is a basic food for making the bread, and wheat being a plant that is a dry weather plant, it takes hot weather and survives those conditions. It was really a boon to Kansas because Kansas was considered, western Kansas in particular, was just a great desert as it was just termed at that time. Mennonites, of course, are very thrifty people, and they saved the seed and distributed it out to other farmers around, and from there it grew. And Turkey Red was practically the only wheat that was planted in the early 1900s from then on. And I can remember when my father was raising wheat, practically all of the bottom land that we had then, we raised wheat on. And I can remember the shocks all over the bottom. It was always quite a sight. And then when after thrashed, the straw stacks. And that was in the mid-30s. Back at that time, we, of course, was cutting wheat with a binder and shocking it. And I got the job of being the water boy, and I had a little spotted pony and carried water around to all the shockers, and also when we were thrashing to the pitchers. When I came back from college, of course, that was all over and we was all mechanized. After the self-propels and the semi-trucks and all, now we're seeing this harvest done. The weather cooperates with the custom cutters, and they can come in and cut this 10 million acres of wheat we raise in Kansas in probably 2 weeks' time or less. That reduces the risk of losing it to hail, bad weather, and what have you. When you're involved in agriculture 100% like we are, there is a certain amount of satisfaction that we are doing some good, and that hopefully we're helping people to survive and providing them the good, wholesome food that this land has to produce. So I don't know any other industry that I'd rather be in than agriculture, because I think of these unique features that we have in farming, and particularly in the good earth.
In the early days of Kansas City aviation, pilots landed here at what used to be a muddy field at the north end of the Hannibal Bridge. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. One of those pilots was Charles Lindbergh, and his visit to Kansas City on a summer's day in 1927 attracted thousands of people who wanted a glimpse of this dashing hero and his flying machine.
There is the opportunity today for anyone of a number of cities in this country to become the air center of the country.
Charles Lindbergh dedicated this airport in 1927. So he flew the Spirit of St. Louis into Kansas City, and he made between 7 and 9 passes, I've heard several varieties of this, to land on the field. And each time he'd come into land, it was either too muddy to land, or there was people in the middle of the field, or the wind was wrong. So he finally got it on the ground, and when you look at the pictures, you can see that the mud in the field was a foot deep. So all those people stomping through the field made it very difficult to operate an airplane. Things got more sophisticated towards the end of the late 20s, so they came up with airplanes that were capable of transporting passengers. And Kansas City happens to be one of the first major hubs in the United States, because the east-west routes and the north-south routes came through Kansas City.
Because Kansas City already was a major railroad hub, it was natural for it to be an aviation hub as well. It wasn't long before Kansas City's Municipal Airport offered service from all the major air carriers.
After the war, airplanes were faster, bigger, and we're talking 100 people on an airplane now versus 20 and 30 people previously.
X-ray clear for takeoff, 320 is 10 to 15.
We started going transcontinental and then transoceanic. We had the Connie up here that we have on the airport. It was the first airplane to go non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean.
Passengers who traveled in the 50s wore their Sunday best because traveling was considered a special occasion, which often included a meal at the airport cafe.
Its downtown location has made Municipal one of the most accessible airports in the United States.
In the heyday of the downtown airport, there was about 2 million passengers a year that went through here. If you want to try to put that in perspective with today, KCI runs about 11 million passengers. So this place would be a little bit of bedlam if we still had the operation still running out of here. Today, the planes flying in and out of downtown airport are mostly corporate jets, following the path of aviation pioneers like Charles Lindbergh, who taught us these amazing machines really could fly. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Remember when your parents used to tell you about the days they walked to school in 2 feet of snow? Many of those stories could have started at Lanesfield School, out here on the Kansas prairie about 10 miles from the county seat in Olathe. Operating as a one-room schoolhouse for 93 years, Lanesfield School taught many youngsters the joys of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, Teresa Weaver takes us back to an October day in 1904.
Dear Mother and Father, I'm writing at the end of a busy school day. I never imagined that being a one-room school teacher could be so difficult. Let me tell you about a typical school day at Lanesfield. I ring the bell at about 8:30. The school children arrive at 9 after their walk to school. We say the pledge, and then I assign the students their first lesson of the day. Usually, I'll bring the first graders up to the recitation bench first, and we might work on reading or arithmetic.
The wind has your soft, downy nest disturbed.
It is difficult to orchestrate 18 students in 8 different grades, all in one schoolroom. At any given time, I might have 5 students at the blackboard working on their arithmetic, 3 or 4 working on penmanship, 2 or 3 working on reading, another doing geography, and I have to make sure they're all learning those lessons. So it is quite difficult, but somehow, with discipline and order, we keep the school running.
Come on, you guys!
We have 2 recess periods during the day, and sometimes I play with the kids outside during recess. I have heard that it does gain their respect when you do so. And we play baseball, 2 cats, and over the schoolhouse, things like that. It took almost 2 months to travel. I think for tomorrow's geography lesson for the 4th graders, we'll discuss the Santa Fe Trail. The trail actually passed very close by the school, and from what I hear, the children really enjoyed running to the school windows just to watch the last wagons pass down the trail on their way to Santa Fe. Of course, the building of the railroad brought an end to all of the busy traffic that went through the town of Lanesfield. Now this school is all that remains of the town of Lanesfield and the Santa Fe Trail traffic that once went through here. But it's never quiet at Lanesfield. The school year here is from October until April, which is organized around the harvest season, of course. School ends at 4 and I ring the bell and the children run home. Well, dear parents, I must sign off. There certainly remains a lot of work to be done inside the school. I miss you, and I will see you in a few weeks. With love, Teresa.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. When it opened in 1927, the Pla-Mor was the largest indoor recreation center in the country. Kansas Cityans came to the Pla-Mor to go bowling, to shoot pool, to go swimming, ice skating, roller skating, and of course, to go dancing.
On opening night, 500 couples romanced their way across the floor.
I don't think there was any other ballroom close to this one that had the advantages of the floor in this ballroom. There were 16,000 square feet of dancing space with 7,800 cushioned springs under the floor so that you didn't get tired while you were dancing. I can remember dancing a whole evening, every single dance, and going home feeling wonderful.
Located on 8 acres from Main to Wyandotte Streets at 31st Terrace, the Pla-Mor attracted immense crowds. Many people danced to the popular music of the day, performed live by entertainment legends such as Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, Lawrence Welk, and Count Basie. and couples sometimes danced until the wee hours of the morning.
In the ballroom, they had the dance marathons. That was about in '39, those were so popular. People would throw money on the floor for their favorite couple, but it was the couple that lasted the longest that won the prize, and they would just be kind of hanging on each other dancing.
The Pla-Mor lived up to its name, treating Kansas Cityans to every sport from roller derbies to billiards. The Pla-Mor bowling team competed nationally, and the Ice Palace was home to the city's first professional hockey team. The public ice rink operated from December through March, when it was transformed into an indoor swimming pool, complete with a sand beach in an adjoining parking lot. For nearly 4 decades, generations of Kansas Cityans grew up at the Pla-Mor. Then the 50s arrived with its rock and roll and television. Attendance at the Pla-Mor began to drop.
I think probably television took away from our crowds, like for hockey games, for instance. If they could get it on TV, the crowds dropped tremendously. Of course, it was only black and white at that time, where we used to have at least 5,000 people, to watch a hockey game. It would drop to around 3,500, which made a big difference.
Activities gradually dwindled, but there was still no other place in town like the Pla-Mor for dancing. Eventually, the 50s took its toll on ballroom dancing too, and Kansas Cityans danced the last dance there on June 14, 1957. Even today, nothing quite compares to the romantic days of the Pla-Mor.
It was a lot of fun.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
He was born into slavery on a plantation in Mexico, Missouri, and despite the oppression of the times, managed to develop an extraordinary gift. He had a way with horses, and that way would eventually get the attention of presidents, royalty, and the Kansas City elite. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today, the story of a man who quite possibly knew the mind of a horse better than anyone on earth, Tom Bass. In pre-industrialized Kansas City, our community, along with every other community, relied on horses. They were the car, the truck, and the tractor, a vital part of everyday life.
People who could train horses to be mannerable in the streets, on the bridle paths, wouldn't kill the kids, run off with the family, run into other horses on the streets. They were valuable people.
Tom Bass was arguably the best.
You want a good horse? You got a Bass horse. A Bass-trained horse was a prized horse. It was like owning a Ferrari.
Tom Bass was lured to Kansas City by businessmen eager to compete with horse trainers in St. Louis and in Kentucky. Soon, Tom was consulting everyone from Kansas City's wealthiest horse owners to the fire chief. And it was with the fire department that one of Tom's ideas led to what later developed into the American Royal.
The story goes is that they wanted to go to Europe to look at some horses in France and in England to pull these fire pumps. And Tom Bass came up with the idea that in order to fund that trip, maybe they might have a horse show.
Tom Bass would eventually move back to Mexico, Missouri and his own stables. Success would bring hundreds of ribbons and trophies in horse shows against names like Vanderbilt and Bush. Presidents would visit his stables. He was invited to England by the Queen, but refused to cross the ocean, saying he never wanted to lose sight of a tree. Throughout his life, he never lost his compassion for his animals. He designed a more humane bit that is still used today.
He never patented a Bass bit because he said he did it for the horses of the world to make their life a little bit easier. Tom, I think, felt some kindred spirit with horses, and it very possibly could have been because he was born a slave, and slaves were treated like stock. And I think he felt some compassion for them. And there are lots of stories where he said he laid awake at night dreaming about how to make their life easier. A writer asked him, well, aren't you afraid of the automobile? The automobile is really coming on. He says, no, actually I'm glad, he said, because the automobile will free the horse up from his burdens that man has put on him, because a lot of horses will now have a better life and won't have to toil under the whip of somebody who's trying to make them do something they're physically not capable of doing.
Back when Kansas was part of a vast Indian territory, the Reverend Thomas Johnson was sent by the Methodist Church to start a mission. The year was 1839. He made such an impact that Johnson County bears his name. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Here at Reverend Johnson's Shawnee Indian Mission, these stately brick buildings reflect the legacy he left hundreds of children who passed through the prairie and learned a trade along the way.
From the beginning, the Shawnee Indian Mission was different from others of its time. In addition to religious lessons, the children learned the skills and trades of the day.
This site, you wonder when religion was actually taught, because the children were up at 4 o'clock in the morning. They had 6 hours of academic studies a day. They had 5 hours of learning or practicing a skill or trade. They had chores to perform because this was a 2,000-acre farm. Religion was actually only taught at the morning meal, the evening meal, and Sunday morning in the chapel. The children were in bed by 8:30 at night. They had free time from 8 to 8:30, and then it was candles out.
Children boarded at the school, sometimes for several years. One of the students, Sally Bluejacket, attended for 8 years.
The children had an awful busy schedule here. The girls were limited to the domestic arts, as you might believe. You learned how to spin yarn, dye it different colors using natural ingredients, weave it into cloth, cut and sew garments, because they made all the garments for everybody here. But cutting and sewing garments back in those days, it is a very, very time-consuming task because they didn't have the sewing machine. Everything was done by hand and needle and thread.
Boys, on the other hand, pursued opportunities in farming, carpentry, shoemaking, and blacksmithing.
As far as we can tell, blacksmithing among the boys was one of the more popular trades that they sought to learn about. And it's understandable because it's got a lot more activity to it, and you'll create things, and it's noisy, the sparks fly. They made hinges, they made latches, they made cooking utensils, anything and everything, because the people here were good tradesmen who taught them their skills and trades.
Though successful in its time, the mission closed in 1862 because political forces in Washington had once again displaced the Indians. They were forced to move from Kansas to the southern part of the Indian Territory, to what is now Oklahoma. Today, this historic site is a testament to the enduring spirit of countless Indian children. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. In 1904, a young man by the name of Isaac Katz and his new wife, Minnie, stepped off the train at Kansas City's Union Depot. Ike was convinced that Kansas City was the land of opportunity. He had $200 in his pocket and was ready to cash in on his dream of opening his own business.
When my grandfather Ike arrived in Kansas City, he decided an appropriate place to set up shop was right across from the train in the old Union Station on Union Avenue in the West Bottoms. He started out selling fruit, groceries, cigars, cigarettes, and newspapers. Business thrived.
So much so that Ike sent for 2 of his cousins and his brother, Michael, to share in the prosperity.
And they came down and assisted him, and business grew and grew until the outbreak of World War I in 1914.
Ike Katz was facing his first major crossroads. The war effort was hitting his business hard. He needed a reason to justify keeping his store open longer hours. The simple solution to this problem would change Ike Katz's life from that point on.
He hired a pharmacist for $22 a week, and that really was the beginning of the Katz Drug Company. They incorporated in 1914 and immediately opened stores at 8th and Grand and 12th and Walnut.
Katz was an aggressive competitor, constantly coming up with new ways to promote his business.
And perhaps the one that they're most known for, Katz pays the tax. And there was a revenue tax on many, many goods sold in the stores. And so they reduced the price of each of the goods by the amount of that tax, giving them a competitive edge over all their competitors.
Low prices and personal service served Ike Katz well through the war years, the 20s, the Great Depression, and beyond.
Ike considered his customers as his friends. He knew many by name. He had his suit coat fashioned with large pockets on the sides and filled them with little nips of perfume and chiclet gum and lifesaver candies. And as he would stroll down 12th Street to his office, he would hand these out to people. He was like the Pied Piper.
Katz Drug Company would expand throughout the Midwest until Ike Katz would arrive at another crossroads called self-service. And rather than change the company's personal service philosophy, the company was sold. Ike and his brother Michael gave back to the community through many charities, and today the UMKC School of Pharmacy bears the Katz brothers' names. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
They were called orphan train riders, homeless children from the East Coast who came to the Midwest in search of a home and parents who would love them. One of the orphan train riders became mayor of Kansas City. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Henry Jost was one of an estimated 200,000 children who made that difficult journey in what became the largest migration of children in our country's history.
The plight of homeless children was most evident in New York City, a major port of entry for immigrant families.
When the immigrants arrived, most of them were penniless. It wasn't, for the most part, well-to-do people who came to this country. Often they had huge families. It wasn't at all unusual for them to have maybe 10 children, 15 children. They found themselves living in hovels and just trying to patch it together. It's no surprise that a lot of those kids were turned out on the streets. The homeless children truly slept on heating grates, and there are photos to prove that, and existed by stealing bread and picking pockets and begging.
A man named Charles Loring Brace wanted to change the plight of these homeless children, and in 1853 he founded the Children's Aid Society. His vision was to take children out of the city by train to some place where there were families.
When Charles Loring Brace sent these children to the Midwest, he was sending them places not only where the trains ran, but where lots of hands were needed to do the labor, and farm families were more apt to make room at their table for an extra child. Some of these children were moved a number of times before they found homes that worked out for them. Sometimes the homes they found weren't good. Sometimes they truly were taken just to be field hands or household servants. Again, it's just an estimate, but the estimate is that probably about 50% of the children really found good homes, that they were wanted and loved.
One train rider fortunate to find a good home was Henry Jost, who at age 6 left the streets of New York City and journeyed to the farm of Judge Philip Dale in Nottoway County, Missouri.
It's a picture of him when he was 5 or 6, and you can see the gentle tenderness in the countenance and in the eyes. You just knew that whatever happened, he would take care of it.
With encouragement from Judge Dale, Henry put himself through law school and served as Kansas City's mayor from 1912 to 1916. After serving one term in Congress, he declined re-election.
And they used to say that the reason he didn't stay in Washington is because he was too honest.
According to some accounts, nearly 500 orphan train riders are still living, with amazing stories to tell about their courageous journey to find home. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
The turn of the century. Just the words set the mind to wondering about what the next millennium may hold. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today, as we ponder what the year 2000 will bring, we want to take you back to the last turn of the century and a story of a group of pioneering women who were determined to make the 1900s better than the 1800s. Their impact on our community has been legendary and will take us well into the next century.
In the late 1800s, Kansas City women began to create small clubs to read and study. As the phenomenon grew, so did the size of the groups. In particular, a club named Kansas City Athanaeum.
It would be a time to study together and work together to fit into a new world. Very different in the 1900s than it had been in the 1800s. They were expecting great things to happen, looking forward to the time when women could own property and could vote and could think for themselves and to be able to finance.
The Athanaeum was the brainchild of 7 women, led by Mary Harmon Weeks. The mission was to better the community in 7 different categories: art, education, home, literature, music, philosophy and science, and social ethics. The membership numbers grew rapidly, and their efforts for women and children's issues had lasting effects.
Mary Harmon Weeks was the first president of the Kansas City Athanaeum. She is really the parent and the starter of the Parent-Teacher Association. She was so anxious that children go to school and that they love school. She wanted the kindergarten to be a part of the school system, and through her efforts, we have kindergartens today.
By the 1920s, Kansas City Athanaeum was 1,000 members strong and powerful enough to take on City Hall for the good of their causes.
Phoebe Jane S. was a crusader. When I think about Miss S., I think about her with this little black notebook, always writing down things that had to be done. As she would go to one courtroom and another, always fighting for women and always for children.
In Kansas City Athanaeum's now more than 100-year-old history, members have fought and conquered literally dozens of issues on behalf of all the women and children of Kansas City.
But most of all, it changed the lives of women to service and to education.
Their accomplishments have stood the test of time and could easily serve as a model for the next 100 years. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
A crisp night in late October. The scent of a crackling fire. You're surrounded by woods, and who knows what else. The perfect time for a story. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Missouri and Kansas are rich with folk tales that grow richer in each telling. And as Halloween approaches, we wanted to share one of those folk tales with you. The story begins just a little southwest of here, across Honey Creek, near the town of Columbus in Johnson County, Missouri, where, according to local legend, the appearance of a mysterious bright light here in the woods changed the Missouri farm family forever.
One of the earliest families to settle near Columbus was the Davidson family. Jonas Davidson worked the land along with his family and his slaves. It was nearing the end of the harvest season, the end of another hard day, when they first noticed something strange in the northern sky. A light, too big for a star, too small for the moon. It didn't move, but it was hard to take your eye off it.
It's nothing.
What was it? That was the topic of conversation well into the evening. The next evening around dusk, the bright light was back, except now it was bigger. It appeared closer, as if it was planning on dropping out of the sky into Jonas Davidson's fields. The next night, even larger. And every night thereafter, the mysterious light grew and grew over the Davidson farm until it was too large to ignore. Jonas was at a crossroads. He had been silent since the light first appeared. but now the light seemed to be threatening the safety of his family and his slaves.
It's scaring my family.
He knew he had to do something. The light was now so big and bright and so low in the sky he felt he could walk to the end of his property and touch it. So he set out to do just that. You could see Jonas's silhouette shrinking smaller and smaller into the light until he was engulfed by it. The sound of Jonas's boots shuffling through the fallen leaves was all that hinted that he was still there. And then the sound stopped. And in the space of a moment, the light went out. An eerie darkness fell over the Davidson farm. The anxiety caused by the once bright light was replaced with anxiety caused by the absence of Jonas Davidson.
Ma'am, he's here.
Suddenly, he appears at the front door, ashen, speechless. He walks right by his family, ignoring the obvious questions about what happened, and goes to bed.
This is your Declaration of Freedom.
The next morning, Mr. Davidson called all of his slaves together and presented each with a letter granting them their freedom. To this day, no one knows what Jonas Davidson experienced when he confronted the light here in the woods in Johnson County.
And the light never reappeared after he freed his slaves. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. In our modern electoral times of computerized polling and massive media campaigns, it would sometimes appear that an election is all but over before the first vote is cast. But polls don't decide elections. People do. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads on a campaign trail in 1948 where it came down to the polls versus the people. The people won, and many were actually surprised.
He said polls don't mean a thing. He said you tell them the truth about everything and they'll believe you and they'll vote for you. He said if Moses had taken the poll, he never would have gone out of Israel.
Harry Truman worked hard in the campaign of 1948. Over the course of 5 months, it was estimated that he traveled more than 31,000 miles and gave 356 speeches to between 12 and 15 million people.
He was in his 60s then, and he had lots of stamina. Someone with less stamina couldn't have done that. But he was enthusiastic, he believed in what he was doing, and he did it. The newsmen who followed him had their tongues hanging out. Sometimes he'd make 4 and 5 speeches a day in different stops. Not all the big cities, they stopped in a lot of the little places.
It was exciting, and you know, really, nobody thought he had a chance. But he fooled them on the whistle stop. He was just one-on-one, really, and the people across the country just really did believe him, and they should have. He was appealing to the common person, to the ordinary American, but it was the great minds that thought that he had lost considerably. But the little towns were all for him.
On election night, Mr. Truman was at the Elms Hotel in Excelsior Springs. He had enjoyed a Turkish bath, eaten a ham sandwich with a glass of milk, and gone to bed. He was awakened at 4 a.m. by Secret Service agents who told him he was winning. By 6 a.m., he was at the Muhlbach Hotel with campaign staff in full celebratory spirit. Dewey conceded at 10:14 a.m. Kansas City time on the morning of November 3rd, 1948. When word reached independence, the city exploded in celebration, honking horns, ringing bells, blowing whistles, and sounding every siren. Pandemonium reigned.
On the south side of the square, he stood on the steps. They blocked off that the street in front of the courthouse from one street to the other. And the crowd absolutely couldn't move. There were that many people. Everybody was so proud. Politics sort of melted away.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. The man who once lived behind me was one of 3 architects of one of the most daring business ventures in American history. His name was Alexander Majors. He and his two partners, W.H. Russell and William Waddell, created the Pony Express. It was a dangerous and very unprofitable business proposition, and they knew that going in, but they did it anyway, and proved that the American spirit would not be broken by the treacherous path to the West. Through 1859, settlers were inching their way toward California with their hopes and dreams packed on the backs of mules and ox teams and in stagecoaches. Once they reached California, everything accelerated with the gold rush. And with that acceleration came a need for faster communication east to west.
And Russell, Majors, and Waddell, the founders of the Pony Express, realize this need, and they want to take advantage of that. They meet with the senator from California, and their real hope is to get a federal contract to carry the mail for $1 million.
But first, the three businessmen had to prove that it could be done. So they set up relay stations over almost 2,000 miles of the untamed West.
The relay stations were set up every 10 to 15 miles. Then there was a bigger station called a home station every 75 to 80 miles. The relay stations were the points where the riders changed horses. And legend has it they had 2 minutes to change at each of these. They could switch their mochila that they carried the mail in. They could get something to eat, maybe go to the bathroom, and then they had to be on the route again. The home stations were where they changed riders, and they were much bigger. A lot of times these would be somebody's ranch or stagecoach stops. Hotels would grow up around them. A lot of times towns would grow up around them. Well, the cost for mailing a letter back in 1860 was $5 per half ounce. Today's cost, that's about $85. So these really aren't letters, Dear Mom, how are things back home? They're really kind of the business, the Federal Express of 1860.
Physically and mentally demanding, the Pony Express rider was a special breed.
Legend has it that they were young, wiry, skinny fellows, orphans preferred because of the dangerous work. The reality is there were a lot of young riders, but there were just as many that were in their 20s and 30s as well.
Raise your right hand.
The firm, they were very religious folks, and they made the riders swear an oath. They gave all of them a Bible, and they made them swear an oath, basically that they would not drink, swear, or fight while they were in the employee of Russell, Majors, and Waddell.
The Pony Express rides longer in our memories than it did across the western terrain, only lasting between 18 and 19 months. Russell, Majors, and Waddell never got that $1 million government contract, and eventually the telegraph and the Transcontinental Railroad made the Pony Express obsolete. But the legends it created remain in full gallop. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
During the holiday season of 1925, Charles Petro walked the streets of the Plaza and came up with a bright idea. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. With the flip of a switch, Mr. Petro gave birth to a glow that has illuminated the spirits of holiday shoppers for decades in this historic district.
Well, the first Christmas lights with a 16-bulb stringer over a doorway in a building that we called Mill Creek. All the buildings were on the north side of 47th Street at that time.
In the years that followed, Mr. Petro added more lights, some bells and candles, and watched a bright idea grow into a spectacular holiday tradition. Mr. Petro also added a crew to install the lights.
The way those old boys did it, they must have been made out of iron. It was all done with wooden ladders. Climb up that ladder, button on 2 nails or whatever a man can reach off the ladder. That's maybe 5 or 6 feet, left to right, tops. Come back down, move the ladder over, go back up. Physically, it was extremely difficult. It's difficult enough now, but it was a lot worse then.
While some things have improved conditions for the crew over the years, there's still that element of risk. Ivan has dealt with that every year since 1967.
At the end of the first season of that, I thought, I'll never do these lights again. I thought it was kind of harrowing. You dream about falling off of things at night. You wake up just before you hit the pavement. So anyway, that was kind of bad on me. I don't like heights all that well. I respect them a lot.
When all the towers and balconies and parapet walls are trimmed with 75 miles of wire and 200,000 bulbs, it's time to run a test in the pre-dawn hours while the city sleeps.
We have it wired together where it's all one unit, so the ceremony switch does function. We're on site, so in the event of a malfunction, we can get it up and going. But the chances of a mechanical failure are extremely small, but there is the chance.
That chance keeps the anxiety high in the moments before the big ceremony Thanksgiving Day. With 250,000 people watching, the countdown begins. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In an instant, the plaza glows with lights and smiles throughout the holiday season.
You know, that's part of the rewards of doing the task. If you can see pleasure or happiness in someone's face, whether it be someone who's 9 or 90 or 3, it's nice to be able to be a part of that.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today we know this place as the crossroads between 435 and State Line. In 1843, State Line marked the edge of the United States. As hundreds of pioneers in covered wagons passed into the Kansas territory on their way to California, Oregon, or Santa Fe, one of their last stops was here at Watts Mill.
The purpose of the mill, as a grist mill, they would take grain and grind it into flour. Now, the mill was visited by local farmers, for one thing, but also some of the people that came out to begin the westward migration. It was a very good assembly point. In addition to having fresh water on Indian Creek, in addition to having wood and grazing area, it was away from the overcrowded areas of Westport Landing, which is now, of course, is River Market, or Independence. These were the initial major beginning points of the trails. Now, it was a water-driven mill, so the amount of flour they could process was fairly limited. They would maybe 4 to 5 bushels an hour. And if you had 100 wagons with all of these families, many of them wanting their grain processed, it would take quite a few days, if not a few weeks.
The Watts family purchased the mill in 1852, and it wasn't long before the talents of Stubbins Watts were as legendary as his long white beard.
Quite often, after Stubbins started playing fiddle, they danced all night, and if the party were a good party, Stubbins would say that they danced the following day, too, before they took off. So I think it was a great place psychologically for the pioneers to get started.
So with the conclusion of the Civil War, the economics in this area changed fairly dramatically. And while Kansas City had become a center of milling, that particular site, because of the size of the mill, it couldn't compete with larger mills. It was really a fairly small operation, and it really fell into somewhat disrepair, and of course was never a significant site of milling after that period.
By 1939, operations at the mill ceased for good. The mill continued to deteriorate and was finally demolished in 1949.
When you go there and you read the history and you look about you and try to ignore the shopping center and ignore the car dealer, but look at the river and think of those people assembled there and think of what lay in wait for them. The river hasn't changed much. The falls are still there. It's not hard to get caught up in what occurred there, such a significant part of our history in May of 1843. We're very lucky to have Watts Mill here.
At this time of year, we often see children's eyes light up with wonder as they ponder the timeless question, where do all these toys come from? When we grow older, of course, we find out the truth. Santa didn't make them all. Santa's elves did.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Many of the treasures those elves have made through the years have found their way to Kansas City. here at the Toy and Miniature Museum.
When the early settlers came to America, they packed some toys. And soon they were making their own, sitting down with a knife and carving out a whistle or sewing garments for nuthead dolls. By 1840, many towns in America had a toy store.
Very first toys were figures of dolls or in the shape of a doll, but marbles were found way back in Egyptian tombs. And even today, you still can pick up ones made out of stone that the slaves made for their children. I have a particular fondness for things that parents made for their children. They didn't necessarily weren't gifted or skillful, but they always show lots of love.
Wise parents soon discovered play was children's work, and they appreciated that play could be very instructional.
I think the most fun of all are the toy houses, because they reflect reality, but they leave lots of room for imagination. And then you get to furnish them, and then you get to put the people in. On and on. You can play by the hour in a dollhouse. Up until now, boys really didn't have dolls' houses, nor did they have dolls. Now they do have dolls today, but they're called action figures. And their dolls' houses are castles. So again, you get the aggressive mode or protective mode of the male child.
Those continuing the tradition of Santa's elves still are carving out toys the old-fashioned way.
There's no other feeling like it. When you can give somebody something that you've made that you know that they'll share. You're not only just thinking of the toys that you're making or what could I make for the children, but you're thinking of the children themselves and how good it will do them. Toys are for boys and girls, and when you got toys, you play. And when you play, you're happy. And that's what it's all about. I like making toys to make people happy.
At the Toy and Miniature Museum of Kansas City, the treasures of more than a century of toy makers fill a child's eyes with wonder.
It's a happy place, and people love to come to it, and not just children. Adults seem to enjoy it just as much as children. And it's a very enlightening sort of idea for children because they see what other children have played with at other times. And then, of course, the parents are always saying, you know, I had that. I wonder what happened to it.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Every family celebrates the holidays with favorite traditions they enjoy year after year. Usually one of those traditions is a visit to Santa. But from 1935 to 1970, children in Kansas City enjoyed a holiday tradition no other city had, a visit to the fairy princess.
Every Christmas, my brother and I would go downtown, and the one place we wanted to go was Klein's department store at 11th and Main, and we'd get on that elevator and we'd ride up to Toyland. And in Toyland, they had all these wonderful toys, but the best part was they had the fairy princess. And we thought she was the best thing ever, because not only was she beautiful, she was magical.
The fairy princess listened to children's wishes, and then she waved her magic wand.
She'd wave that, and presto, out would come a beautifully wrapped gift. So you would then unwrap the gift, and you would have a Christmas gift even before Christmas in your hand to enjoy right then and there. You didn't have to wait till Christmas morning. We loved it. It was the highlight of our downtown Christmas experience.
The Christmas magic downtown included a winter wonderland at the Jones store.
And they had a train that my brother and I also loved to go to right after we went to the Fairy Princess, because you could ride in this train and you just didn't go round and round. They had an actual winter wonderland that had been created. It was quite wonderful.
The lure of winter wonderlands and animated store windows attracted crowds downtown until families started moving to the suburbs.
Klein's department store closed in 1970. Many of the department stores closed, and so you lost all of that wonderful magic that was even beyond the Fairy Princess, because it was a magical time downtown.
How old did you say you were? 5.
To recreate one of the treasured traditions of downtown Christmas, the Kansas City Museum brought back the Fairy Princess, who, with the wave of her magic wand, continues to make children's wishes come true.
That's a part of our history that was, I felt, something that children of today should be able to enjoy, as I and my brother did. And now I'm bringing my great nieces and nephews and my grandchildren here. And you know what? They love her as much as I did.
We often take for granted the convenience of having ice at our fingertips. However, in our not too distant past, in the late 1940s and early 50s, a refrigerator was a newfangled invention. Before that is a memory frozen in time. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today, the age of the icebox in Kansas City. A day when the cold was brought to your door, not by the weatherman, but by the Iceman.
I can remember the Iceman dressed in regular working clothes, but he also had an apron in front and an apron in back that hung from his shoulders. It was leather, so that he wouldn't get soaked with the melting ice. And he would drip water all over the stairway and in the kitchen. And many women who were very, very particular would lay down newspapers on the floor.
Ice was a hot commodity in the early 1900s in Kansas City.
Well, at one time, the ice business was the third-ranking business in the United States. Kansas City Ice Company had 21 plants. At one time, there was probably over 40 plants here in Kansas City. This plant right here produced over 250 ton a day, year-round.
Railroads were a big user for their refrigerated cars. Restaurants, too. And then there was the home delivery.
The Iceman came maybe every other day or so, and for him to know how much ice to bring, we left a card in the window. And it said either 10, 25, 50, or 100. The number that was up, that was the number that he had to bring up to 3rd floor. And the ice would go in the ice box.
The City Ice Company boasted the largest and oldest fleet of Chevrolet delivery trucks in the world. It was hard not to spot one traveling the streets of Kansas City. Ice was a very solid business.
At one time, this place had 6 full-time telephone operators. On the north side of the building was the storage building that held approximately 30,300-pound cakes. It held 1,500 cakes to a tier, 20 tiers high. They had a single cake elevator in there that took the ice up and down.
But as time passed, the ice business began to slide with the advent of the refrigerator. And much to the dismay of the Iceman, Kansas Cityans warmed up to the idea fairly quickly, leaving behind the notion of how precious ice had been.
I can remember picnics we had, 4th of July picnics we'd have on the church lawn, and we would have about a 40-gallon stoneware jar, and they would get a hunk of ice, maybe weighed 10 pounds, and put in there and have iced tea in it, to serve. And we thought it was such a treat, to have real iced tea.
In the holiday season of 1882, Frank James of the notorious James Gang was in jail. And strange as it may seem, he was thankful to be there. Although he had successfully eluded the law since the Civil War, he was tired of running. A $10,000 bounty had been placed on him and his brother Jesse, and Jesse had just been shot and killed by one of his own men. Frank feared that he was next, so this uncatchable, legendary criminal surrendered. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, the brief and bizarre holiday detention of Frank James in the Independence Jail. By the time Frank James surrendered in October 1882, he had become somewhat of a folk hero.
He surrendered in Jefferson City to Governor Crittenden and to the surprise of all Missourians practically. He was believed to be uncatchable. He was brought from Jefferson City, Missouri to Independence here, where charges were pending against him.
For a man headed for jail, Frank James received a warm reception.
Frank, what an honor. Boys, got a genuine hero in here. You all take care of him.
And in that reception, there were lots of the local business leaders, including bankers, which is kind of an ironic twist when a banker comes and visits Frank James on his arrival to Independence.
This area was home to many Confederate sympathizers, and Frank was seen as a man who spent most of life fighting back the northern influences represented by banks and railroads. Frank James was a guest of the citizens of Jackson County from October 1882 to January 1883.
I brought you some flowers, Mr. James.
If you look at the jail cells here at the old jail, you'll see that most folks didn't have very good accommodations. There might be a mat on the floor, maybe a chair, and that would be about it. Frank James did have a dresser. He had a rocking chair so that he could relax.
Frank, your family is here.
And his wife and child were allowed to be here with him at almost all times, which in itself is a difference between the other prisoners.
By the time Frank James went to trial in Gallatin, Missouri, the case had grabbed the attention of the entire nation.
And after 16 days of trial, which was unheard of at that time, after having dream teams on both sides, 6 defense and 6 prosecution attorneys who were as good as you could get, Frank James was found not guilty.
Frank James lived out a relatively normal life, selling shoes and appearing in Wild West shows with Cole Younger. He died where he was born, here in Kearney, Missouri, on February 18, 1915. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Long, long ago, on the night of the very first Christmas, all of creation welcomed the Christ child with special gifts. Everything had something to offer the child, including the trees. The fruit trees all produced tasty treats. The sycamore offered comforting shade, and the stately oak gave beautiful wood. But the humble fir tree felt sad because it didn't have any gifts worthy to give the newborn child. It had no rich-grained wood, it produced no tasty fruit, and it didn't even have a wonderful smell like the cedar. Up in the heavens, the stars gazed down on the humble fir tree, and their hearts ached because it was so sad. So the stars got together and decided to reach down from the heavens and touch the tree with their brilliant light. The light of the stars made the fir tree glow with such radiance that the Heavenly Father saw the tree and thought it was the most beautiful gift of all. So he blessed the tree with a special gift of its own. Each fall, when all the other trees lost their leaves, the fir tree remained forever green. And each holiday season we decorate our trees with lights as a reminder of the gift from the stars to the humble fir tree on the night Christ was born. The Christmas tree has illuminated the spirits of Kansas Cityans for generations. Back in 1908, Mayor Tom Crittenden initiated the Mayor's Christmas tree, asking citizens to place gifts under the tree for those neighbors less fortunate. tree became a symbol of our city's generous spirit, growing each year both in its size and in the generosity it sparked. Today, the mayor's Christmas tree, a Douglas fir, towers 100 feet over Crown Center Square. It's almost as big as the hearts of Kansas Cityans. I'm Bill Kalahurka. From all of us at Kansas City Crossroads, happy holidays. When this theater first opened in 1900, the audience arrived by horse-drawn carriage, perhaps to watch vaudeville star Fanny Brice. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Through the years, the Folly stage has hosted such legendary performers as the Marx Brothers and Gypsy Rose Lee. It has seen its share of vaudeville and burlesque, and in the 1970s, it nearly became a parking lot. But thanks to some visionary Kansas Cityans, it has been restored to its original grandeur, so that now people can arrive by limousine to what some may call Kansas City's Carnegie Hall.
It's seen a colorful history over the years. I've often said that there's not another stage anywhere in the world that has a broader range of entertainment than the Folly. Before there were motion pictures, vaudeville was a huge touring production structure in the United States, and virtually every city and even small towns had a vaudeville theater. And there were literally thousands of vaudeville entertainers that toured America.
At one time or another, all the national headliners took a bow on the Folly stage.
And it included all kinds of attractions. There were the baggy pants comedians, there were jugglers, there were theatrical sketches, and then there was always the burlesque, the showgirls that would come out. The heyday of the burlesque era was during the 1940s. Of course, that was during the World War II era, and thousands of servicemen passed through Kansas City, stopping off from Union Station, and this was one of the primary tourist spots for servicemen to visit. One of the famous strippers or burlesque stars was Sally Rand, and she became famous for her fan dancing, where she would stand behind these huge feathered fans and suggestively move them around. I don't know that all that much was revealed, but I think it was more the art of suggestion than anything else.
During the 1950s, the Folly began its demise. After showing X-rated movies in the 1960s, the Folly's tattered curtain closed for the last time.
There were window panes broken on the outside that remained broken for literally decades. I know this because when they went in to clean out the attic space, they had to clean out 9 tons of pigeon droppings from the attic of the Folly. So you can only imagine how long it would have taken for that to have built up.
Through a community-wide effort, Kansas City's grand old theater was saved from the wrecking ball. Restoration paid close attention to detail, including the lighted ball that was part of the 1900 design.
In 1981, when the Folly reopened, they did start the tradition that lasted for at least a few years, where people would gather in Barney Alice Plaza, and the ball would drop to ring in the new year here in Kansas City.
Today, the Folly stage once again plays host to nationally acclaimed performers.
The world-renowned acoustics are of world-class variety, and the very same performers that appear at Carnegie Hall also appear on the stage of the Folly Theater. So it's really not a stretch to refer to it as Kansas City's Carnegie Hall.
Just a few miles northeast of downtown Kansas City, an underground giant has bored itself into the side of Bethany Falls Ledge along the Missouri River. Its name is Subtropolis.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. For more than 50 years, Kansas Cityans have picked away at this hard limestone and carved out the world's, that's right, the world's largest underground industrial park. The original reels of Gone with the Wind are stored here, as are the original MASH episodes, and there's room for plenty more. You could fit 35 Arrowhead stadiums in this place. But this subterraneous wonder as it exists today was really an afterthought. The original miners of Bethany Falls were more interested in what they could take out than what they put in.
The beginning stages of underground real estate development started in the early 1930s. There was an asphalt paving company called Midwest Precode. They needed crushed stone for their mining operation to create asphalt. There was a resource along the Missouri River beds. The Bethany Falls limestone, ledge of limestone, was a very hard limestone, which was good for the crushed stone that they needed. We began laterally mining into the side of the limestone bluff in 1945. When the initial mining started, they had no concept of using the space for secondary usage in later years.
It wasn't until 1964 that the underground storage idea began to emerge. Miners changed from a random method of mining to a room and pillar method, creating a future that was wide open.
It's amazing to imagine that from a limestone crushing operation, the facility has grown to approximately 10 million square feet of developed space, with 4.5 million square feet of space available for leasing.
Every day is a near perfect day underground. Subtropolis naturally stays between 65 and 72 degrees, ideal for storage.
If you are a stamp collector, then your stamps would be distributed from this facility. They have approximately 300,000 square feet where they store collector stamps and distribute them. We also have a wide assortment of food products. Again, because of the temperature and humidity control, it makes it ideal for storage of candy, frozen products, dried canned goods.
45 companies make Subtropolis their home, and approximately 1,300 people drive into the underground every day to work. Little did the first miners of limestone here realize that they were paving the way to such a prosperous future under the surface of Bethany Falls. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Walking through these doors is like walking back in time to an era when craftsmen lovingly created these jewels of living light. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Here in the River Market, we find a story about a remarkable lady who is sometimes called Kansas City's Queen of Stained Glass.
It all started innocently enough when the Meierhoffs were looking for ways to decorate their authentic German restaurants.
We knew we needed stained glass, and we found that there was lots of stained glass in and around Kansas City.
They often found the stained glass in buildings destined for the wrecking ball, so Mrs. Meierhoff set out on a rescue mission.
We want to rescue all that we can because they are treasures, and you can never find them elsewhere because they came from the finest old churches and the most beautiful homes in this part of the country.
Even though she is no longer in the restaurant business, Mrs. Meierhoff has transformed her passion for rescuing stained glass into what is perhaps the largest collection in the country.
As you see, there's very little room to even put more things, so I have another warehouse because I have so many that I'm rescuing and treasuring. They're just like my children.
When Mrs. Meierhoff adopted her children, she often found them covered with years of dirt and dust, so she set about learning the art of stained glass restoration.
We have learned by finding very old artists that worked on them 50 or 60 years ago.
What Mrs. Meierhoff learned, she passed on to her daughter, and she passed on what she had learned to her husband. Sometimes finding just the right piece of glass takes some time.
We have hundreds of old windows,
And so we take and save every piece of glass that we have, and then it's just a process of going through with a light box and a various glass until you come to something that is the same or that is close as possible.
When the restoration work is complete, the windows are ready to catch the light as the sun moves across the sky from dawn toward dusk.
They have many different facets of the glass, and it's different times of the day. They are really treasures because there's nothing else that gives the wonderful rays and tells a story. It tells the story of its time.
Harry Truman called him, quote, the best damn painter in America. Thomas Hart Benton and his expansive murals taught us something about ourselves. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. His style was distinctly Benton, straightforward, colorful, and sometimes brutally honest.
For much of his life, Thomas Hart Benton called Kansas City home.
He was an American scene painter, and at that time in the 1930s, middle 30s, the scene painters, the realistic painters were not in vogue. This new abstractionism had arisen, and Benton was at war with those people. And so he finally decided to give up New York, and that's why they moved here and came back here.
His studio in the Valentine neighborhood welcomed friends who shared an appreciation of his unpretentious manner and his salty wit.
Looked very much like it does today. They didn't disturb it much. It was smelled of turpentine and his paints. You can see all these brushes are still here.
Using those brushes to paint America the way he saw it, Benton achieved worldwide acclaim.
Because fame came to him early and late, and he wore it simply as a plain and sometimes prickly garment, sometimes bourbon-stained, but never starchy. The greatest thing I think that ever happened to him was his wife. He married a native-born Italian, Rita Piacenza. She husbanded the fires of his genius in his life and took care of him. I don't think he would have amounted to become a great painter if it hadn't been for her.
In addition to his skills as a painter, Benton played a mean harmonica.
He was an amazing harmonica player. He, in fact, invented a method of scaling harmonica music on the 4 or 5 lines, and then he had these little symbols which represented inhaling or exhaling, and there were notes of a scale, and it's known as Benton's harmonica music.
Benton is probably best remembered for capturing the heart of America and his native Missouri.
He disdained without malice high society, which he likened to, quote, froth on a glass of beer, close quote. But he deeply loved what he called the solid underneath layer of common folk and his fellow man. And through his remarkable, multifaceted genius, he portrayed for all of us these wondrous images on canvas, on paper, on stone, and in figures of clay and bronze. That was Thomas Hart Benton.
If you were to name the great architects of Kansas City's prosperity, you would have to include Robert Alexander Long. After all, he provided the framework for almost every warehouse, factory, and home built in Kansas City in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Mr. Long was a lumber baron who built this mansion as a symbol of his and Kansas City's early success. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today it stands as a monument to history, thanks to a lady by the name of Olive Hoggins, who used a flashlight to see the mansion through the dark days of the Great Depression. R.A. Long had enjoyed 3 long decades of prosperity, but when the Great Depression hit in 1929, Long struggled to keep his business out of receivership.
Their lumber company was, I would say, in a great decline, and therefore they were very upset because they couldn't keep the house. It cost a fortune to heat this house.
The house had 15 bathrooms and about 50 rooms, including a bowling alley in the basement. After Mr. Long died in 1934, the mansion on Gladstone Boulevard found itself at its first crossroads, and in 1939, Long's daughters gave the house to Kansas City. To ensure the house did not fall into disrepair, Mrs. Olive Huggins kept vigil.
Olive Huggins came and lived here all by herself. The story is she lived here all alone with a flashlight so the city and nobody else would tear it down or vandalize it. She was protecting the property. And of course at that time nobody had any money to preserve the mansion. But she was persistent. So she had an idea. She thought, well, I'm going to get women of influence in the community, hopefully somebody that has the money and the influence that will save this building.
And she did. She enlisted the help of 4 influential women, Mrs. May Reed Porter, Mrs. Lorraine Page, Mrs. Bessie Jones, and Mrs. Wanda Graham. Together, they worked tirelessly to save the building.
So for 3 years, they just came out here and did it all on their own. They had stories of people in the neighborhood bringing them lunch because there was, of course, no place to eat. There was hardly any heat, and they didn't care. They really knew that it was important for Kansas City to have a history museum.
The Kansas City Museum proudly opened to the public in May 1940, featuring an extensive American Indian collection. And now, when the museum collections become part of Science City, the mansion on Gladstone Boulevard finds itself at another crossroads, with its next chapter yet to be written.
These women had a dream, and the Friends of Corinthian All have the same dream. We would like to bring it back in the original, the way it was.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Few names across the landscape of Kansas City history stir more raw emotion, both positive and negative, than the name Tom Pendergast. From 1910 to 1939, the name Pendergast was synonymous with power, influence, and corruption. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today we explore a crossroads in Kansas City history created by a single man and uncover the mystique of Pendergast prosperity and how the secret of his power was found in the color of the ink in his pen.
In 1910, a 38-year-old Tom Pendergast was getting his first real taste of politics as a newly elected city council member. He was following the same career path as his older brother Jim, something he had been doing since he was 18 years old, first as a deputy constable and later a saloon owner on 12th Street. But Pendergast's term on the council was short-lived, by his own design, as most things were. He retired from elected office in 1915 to head the Jackson Democratic Club, where his power and influence really began to grow.
Tom Pendergast, beginning in 1928, on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings, would meet the public who wished to talk with him at the headquarters of the Jackson Democratic Club. Basically, this was a granting of favors, or in some cases not. Frequently, the requests were for jobs. He would write a note to this person, and if he wrote it in red, that was a signal to everyone at the other end that Tom really would like you to grant this request. If he wrote it in blue, it meant don't grant this request. And if he wrote it in a black pencil, it was, well, you can do it, but it's no favor to me. The people coming in did not necessarily understand the system because they would get the same favorable kind of recommendation from Pendergast. Regardless, it just might be in a different color of pencil.
Pendergast, or Boss Tom as he became known, appeared to be running Kansas City from the second story of a small office at 1908 Main Street.
But the reality was, in those days, if you wanted something done in the city for yourself or an improvement to the city or whatever, you knew where to go, Tom Pendergast's office. He had a way of expressing his wishes as demands.
By the mid-1930s, Tom Pendergast was the controlling partner in more than 20 businesses, including liquor, concrete that built most of downtown, and a racetrack at which he bet $2 million on horses in 1935, losing $600,000.
It was an example both of power corrupting and of power being used effectively, because there were many ways in which the city accomplished things in the 1930s that other cities wished they could accomplish.
Tom Pendergast went to prison in 1939 for tax evasion, was out within a year, but died before the end of his 5-year probation on January 26, 1945. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
A remarkable Kansas City woman named Hazelle Hedges Rollins had a flair for pulling strings. With her artistic talents and her passion for puppets, Hazelle dedicated her life to children and the wonders of their imaginations. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Hazelle transformed this synagogue on Admiral Boulevard into the largest production facility in the world for the making of puppets and marionettes. Armed with a fine arts degree from KU in 1932, Hazelle took a job as a switchboard operator at the Nelson Atkins Museum and began helping with the marionette classes there. At the same time, she started making marionettes, first for the Boy Next Door and then for the Brookside Toy Store and Emery Bird Thayer. After a visit to the New York Toy Fair in 1935, Hazelle returned with orders from all over the country, and she knew she was in business.
It had been in the recreation room of their home, and her father was getting concerned that they were running a business out of a home, and he didn't want to do that, so he thought she ought to find a place to set this business up.
Over the years, Hazelle set up business at various locations in Kansas City, finally settling on Admiral Boulevard. By this time, she was producing 1,000 puppets a week.
In fact, her first puppets were hand-carved wooden heads. But later they went to a lacquer. It was a sodium silicate wood paste combination, and then it was dipped in lacquer, which was very time-consuming. It took hours, days for it to dry.
Even though production processes improved over the years, the making of puppets and marionettes was always labor-intensive because much of it was done by hand.
So then after the war, when plastics came along, they were able to go to this tenite, they called it. It was an early type of plastic. And so, it made a more interesting looking puppet, more durable.
The popularity of Hazelle's puppets and marionettes soared.
People had theaters in their home. This was kind of like the TV, only you had a theater. And children would perform things. As soon as television came along, they shifted the marionettes to television, and Howdy Doody was popular, and Sherry Lewis.
The purpose of puppets was always to spark children's imaginations.
I think she truly liked children, and I think she loved the marionettes.
Hazelle and her husband Woody retired in 1975 and sold the business. During its peak, Hazelle's produced up to 250,000 puppets and marionettes each year, and more than 300 different designs. But Tito the Clown was always the perennial favorite. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. On this piece of land here at Barney Alice Plaza, a miracle was performed in 1900. Not by any cosmic force, but you could call it spiritual. Citizens at the time called it the spirit of Kansas City. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, an extraordinary display of determination by a young Kansas City that was dubbed the 90-Day Miracle. In the late 1800s, Kansas City was thinking big. It was already one of 3 major cities in the Midwest and determined to take its place on the national map as a prominent center of trade. An important key to growing Kansas City was to create a gathering place.
I believe it was in 1893, William Rockwell Nelson started promoting
the need for having a convention center, which would allow the city to have large groups of people, large shows, and things that would benefit Kansas City and the whole area.
And the whole area got behind the effort. On December 2nd, 1897, with a $100,000 budget, Kansas City decided to build a convention center. 14 months and $225,000 later, Kansas City's convention center opened. And no one seemed to mind that it cost more than double the original budget. And plans were already in place for the center to host its first major event, the Democratic National Convention of 1900. But about 1 p.m. on April 4th, 1900, 3 months before Kansas City was to host the nation, the unthinkable happened. Kansas City's brand new convention center was on fire, and in no time, 6 years of dreaming, planning, and building was reduced to a smoldering pile of rubble. The city was devastated, but not down.
The whole city pulled together and got the railroads, all of the unions that were in existence at that time, the working unions, to construct this convention center, all made it a big priority to have this center finished because everyone felt it was so important for Kansas City and for the area at that time to have this very important event happen in Kansas City.
In 3 short months, with crews working around the clock, Kansas City rebuilt its convention center.
The slogan, Kansas City Spirit, arose from the efforts of everyone. All of the population of the city at that time were involved in having this wonderful convention center completed, and on July the 4th, 1900, indeed, the convention center was open.
Kansas City had pulled off a miracle in front of a national audience, solidifying Missouri's stature as the Show Me state. William Jennings Bryan was chosen as the Democratic candidate at the convention, but lost the presidential election to William McKinley. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. On July 11, 1879, Edward Harry Kelly was born with a song in his heart. He spent all of his 75 years in Kansas City, putting our town's life and times to music. He predated jazz, cutting his musical teeth on marches. But as he matured as a composer and performer, his music grew more offbeat. Ragtime, they called it. People loved it. Not just here in Kansas City, but around the world. The name E. Harry Kelly was inked in our nation's musical notation as one of the fathers of ragtime.
Music before ragtime was pretty much on the beat. Every note was on the beat. Dum 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 dum. Ragtime went dum 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 dum, and that was different. That was something people hadn't heard. And that's what made it popular.
E. Harry Kelly was born in the cradle of ragtime.
Kansas City kind of sat in the middle of the cradle of ragtime, from Sedalia to Joplin, St. Joe, Lawrence. And Kansas City, being the largest city in there, had the biggest music publishing companies.
E. Harry Kelly had the first ragtime hit to come out of Kansas City. His rag Peaceful Henry was the first big hit. That was 1901.
Kelly kept Kansas City's feet tapping with songs about familiar places. Oftentimes, it was places he would play.
The Muhlbach was written for the Muhlbach Hotel soon after it opened. Kelly played at the larger nightclubs in the hotels and did a good job with it. Everybody liked him, and he liked to write pieces for those places because it kind of gave him a foot in the door. He did Kansas for University of Kansas and included the phrase rock, chalk, jayhawk.
Kelly was the people's musician.
If people wanted marches during World War I, he wrote marches. They wanted foxtrots after the war, he wrote foxtrots. While other musicians got popular and left Kansas City, he stayed, and I think he was appreciated for that.
These pieces reflect the time and place. They reflect the Kansas City of the turn of the century.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Around the turn of the century, Kansas City was a wide-open town. Prostitution was legal. Saloons and gambling halls were plentiful. But even then, sometimes folks found themselves on the wrong side of the law. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Those undesirables often found their way here to 21st and Vine, the site of Kansas City's Municipal Workhouse, a minimum security correctional facility designed for those convicted of minor offenses. But it wasn't long before city reformers developed the premise that those in trouble could be rehabilitated through hard work and the learning of a trade.
One of the work projects assigned to prisoners was the building of the Kansas City Municipal Farm, located just west of Arrowhead Stadium. Officials at the time believed prisoners would be better served in an environment away from the central city. Opened in 1909, Leeds Farm was self-supporting through the work done by inmates. Growing vegetables taught sound work habits and put food on the table. Inmates also tended the cows at the farm's dairy operation, and they learned how to care for pigs on one of the largest municipal pig farms in the Midwest.
So the idea was, let's do positive things with these individuals while incarcerated. Let's help them build their self-esteem. Let's help them learn a trade. There was a machine shop, there was a woodworking shop. There were a number of activities that were provided then as a means for someone to maybe, even if they're only here for 30, 60, or 90 days, to develop a trade or develop an interest in a particular trade. That was part of the rehabilitation process then as it is today.
Officials in Kansas City were optimistic that rehabilitation actually was possible. It was a concept considered quite revolutionary for its time, attracting visitors from all over the country to Leeds Farm.
The time of the past was, I think, truly looking at this idea of rehabilitation, the idea that people were not supposed to be sent to prison to be punished, but the idea was they were sent there as punishment. That concept is probably much more cutting edge than we might imagine.
Many reformers believe the cell does things to prisoners, but the farm does things for them. Through hard work, Leeds inmates earned privileges such as using the library or attending movies and religious services. Good behavior and demonstration of a good work ethic proved beneficial during hearings before the parole board and led to an early release.
There are far too many people in jail. I don't know where the end of that is going to be. It's something that we don't have any direct control of, but maybe some indirect control of.
The issue of more than 100 years ago, should jail be for punishment or rehabilitation, is still locked up in debate. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Kansas City Crossroads is a production of NBC 41, proud to bring you the stories of the people and events that have shaped our rich heritage.